Hey guys, I wanted to share this story because it still creeps me out and my friends, and I still talk about it. This literally happened like 3 years ago, but I still get shivers thinking about it. So, me and 4 of my friends, let's call them Tyler, Mike, Sam, and Jess, decided to go camping. We found this spot online that was pretty deep in the woods, not an official campground, just a clearing near a trail. It took us like 2 hours to hike in. Everything was fine at first. We set up the tents, got the campfire going, drank some beers, and were just chilling. Around 11:30 p.m., Tyler said he had to go pee. He grabbed his flashlight and walked off into the woods to the left of our tents. Like, maybe 2 minutes after he left, we suddenly heard this voice. It was a guy yelling, "Hey, help. Someone help me. I'm over here." We all froze. The most terrifying part was that it sounded exactly like Tyler. Like literally his exact voice, his tone, his accent, everything. But the weird thing was, the voice came from the right side, deep in the trees. Like, completely opposite of where Tyler had just gone. Mike stood up and said, "Is that Tyler? How did he get over there so fast?" Jess said, "No, Tyler went that way," and she pointed to the left. "And why is he yelling from all the way over there?" Sam got really freaked out and said we shouldn't go check it out. We were all just standing there by the fire, debating what to do. It was so confusing because it sounded just like our friend, but the direction was totally wrong. We didn't want to leave him if he was somehow hurt, but it felt super sketchy. We were just hesitating and arguing about what to do. While we were standing there, Tyler suddenly walked back into the campsite from the left side, shining his flashlight. We all jumped. Mike immediately asked him, "Dude, what's wrong? Why were you calling for help from over there?" Tyler looked at us like we were crazy. He said, "What are you talking about? I didn't say anything. I was just peeing." We told him we literally just heard his voice yelling for help from the other side of the woods. Tyler's face went totally pale. He swore he didn't say a word, and he didn't hear anything either because he had his hood up. Right then, the woods went completely silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. It was just super eerie. Knowing that something out there was mimicking Tyler's voice to lure us into the dark gave us this terrible gut feeling. We didn't know if it was some guy trying to kidnap us or if it was something else, like something paranormal. Honestly, we didn't want to find out. We literally threw all our sleeping bags and expensive gear into our bags, didn't even pack the tents properly, just shoved them in their sacks and hiked back to the car in the pitch black with our flashlights. We didn't stop looking behind us the whole way. We drove home that same night and ended the trip right there. We haven't gone back since. Has anyone else ever experienced something like this in the woods? Story 2. I grew up in Phoenix, a city of concrete and strip malls, where the scariest things you encounter are heat stroke and bad drivers. But 2 years ago, my Uncle Ted asked me to watch his property for 2 weeks while he went to Colorado for a family emergency. Ted lives out in Navajo County, about 40 minutes outside of Show Low. His place is isolated, just a small, double-wide modular home, sitting on 10 acres of high desert scrub and ponderosa pine. When I arrived, Ted was already packing his truck. He seemed unusually tense, rushing around and barely making eye contact. Before he left, he handed me a sheet of lined paper. "Read these. Follow them. Don't think you're too smart for them, Tyler," he said, his voice deadly serious. I laughed it off at the time, pocketing the list. It wasn't until he drove off and the dust settled that I actually read it. Most of it was standard stuff. How to prime the water pump, when to feed his outdoor barn cat, where the fuse box was. But the last 3 rules were bizarre. Keep the heavy curtains drawn after 7 p.m. Do not look out the windows, even if you hear something hitting the glass. If you hear a dog whining or scratching at the door, do not let it in. I do not have a dog, and the barn cat knows to stay in the shed. If you hear someone you know calling your name from the trees, do not answer. Do not acknowledge it. go to the interior hallway, close the doors, and wait for morning. I figured Ted had lived alone in the woods for too long and had let local folklore get to his head. I spent the first 2 days enjoying the quiet, playing video games, and drinking beer. On the third night, things changed. Around 10:30 p.m., the forest went completely silent. If you've ever been in the deep woods, you know there's always a baseline of noise. Crickets, cicadas, the wind in the pines. But this was a sudden, suffocating quiet. It felt like the air pressure in the room had dropped. Then came the smell. It wafted in through the swamp cooler, a sickening, heavy stench of copper and rotting meat, like something had died in the walls. I choked, turning off the cooler, and that's when I heard it. A heavy, wet thud against the side of the house. I froze. It sounded like a heavy sack of flour being dropped against the siding. It was followed by a dragging sound, moving slowly along the outer wall toward the living room window. Scrape. Scrape. I remembered Rule 1, but curiosity is a hard thing to suppress. I was convinced it was a stray black bear, or a mountain lion. I crept over to the living room window, where the heavy blackout curtains were drawn shut. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and parted the fabric by just a fraction of an inch to peek outside. The floodlight on the porch was on, casting a harsh yellow glow over the dirt driveway. Standing just at the edge of the light's reach was a coyote. Except it wasn't. My brain struggled to process what I was looking at. It was far too large, the size of a wolf, but horribly emaciated, its ribs pushing sharply against patchy, graying fur. Its front legs were bent at an unnatural, backward angle, and it was attempting to stand on its hind legs, wobbling slightly like a marionette on loose strings. But it was the head that made my stomach drop. The snout was deformed, slightly shortened. In the eyes, they weren't the reflective yellow eyes of an animal. They were wet, pale, deeply set human eyes, and they were staring directly at the gap in the curtains where I was looking. It knew I was there. The creature took a step forward, its movements jerky and mechanical. It unhinged its jaw, exposing a row of blunt, human-like teeth coated in thick saliva. Then, a voice came out of it. "Tyler?" My blood turned to ice. It was my sister's voice. "Clara. Tyler, please open up. I got a flat tire. It's so cold out here." The voice sounded exactly like her, but the cadence was completely wrong. It was flat, monotone, and repetitive, like a low-quality voice memo being played on a loop. The creature's throat convulsed violently with every word, but its lips didn't move to form the sounds. "Tyler, please open up. It's so cold." I backed away from the window, dropping the curtain. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it was painful. I remembered Rule 3. Do not answer. Do not acknowledge. I stumbled backward into the hallway, pulling the door to the living room shut, and locked myself in the windowless bathroom. I sat on the cold tile floor, clutching a heavy iron fireplace poker I had grabbed on the way. Outside, the sounds got worse. I heard footsteps on the wooden porch steps. Not animal paws, but heavy, fleshy slaps, like bare human feet walking on wet wood. Then something began to tap on the bathroom's exterior wall. Tap, tap, tap. It was the rhythmic clicking of fingernails against the siding. And then the voice changed. It wasn't Clara anymore. What the hell was that? It was my own voice. It was repeating the exact phrase I had mumbled to myself an hour earlier when I first smelled the rot. It was a perfect mimicry of my own tone, my own breath, coming from the other side of the wall. What the hell was that? What the hell was that? It repeated the phrase faster and faster, its voice overlapping itself until it sounded like a choir of me screaming in a frantic, rising panic. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, crying silently in the dark. I didn't sleep a single second. I just sat there, listening to the frantic whispering of my own voice outside the wall, accompanied by the wet scratching of fingernails trying to find a seam in the wood. Around 5 a.m., the first light of dawn must have filtered through, because the forest suddenly came back to life. I heard the distant call of a scrub jay, and the oppressive silence vanished. I waited until 8 a.m. before I finally gathered the courage to open the bathroom door. The house was dead quiet. The smell of rot was gone. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. On the dusty porch, there were no animal tracks. Instead, there were dusty, bare human footprints, wide and slightly deformed, leading up the steps to the front door. They hovered around the window I had peeked through, and then trailed off the porch, heading toward the dense tree line. But halfway to the trees, the human footprints abruptly stopped. From that point on, only the deep, heavy prints of a dragging, four-legged animal continued into the dark woods. I didn't wait for my uncle to get back. I packed my bags, left the keys on the counter, and drove back to Phoenix. I haven't been back to northern Arizona since, and I don't think I ever will. Story 3. This happened back in October of 2021. Me and my cousin, let's call him Jake, not his real name, because he is still super paranoid about this whole thing, went out to this spot near his uncle's property in northern New Mexico. It's basically in the middle of nowhere, like completely off the grid. No cell service at all. We wanted to do some late season camping and just hang out, drink some beers, and sit by the fire. It was around 1:30 in the morning and we were sitting by the fire. The wood was mostly burnt down, so it was just glowing coals and really dark. It got super quiet all of a sudden. Like, there were no crickets, no wind, nothing. Just dead silence. It felt really heavy, if that makes sense. Like when the air pressure changes before a big storm. Then we heard this noise from the tree line, which was only about 30 yards away from our tent. It sounded like someone clearing their throat really loudly. We both froze. Then a voice came out of the dark. It sounded exactly like Jake's mom. It said, "Jake, come inside. It's getting cold." The thing is, Jake's mom lives in Albuquerque, which is like a 3-hour drive away, and she definitely wasn't in the middle of the woods at 2 in the morning. Jake literally went white. I thought it was some kind of sick joke or a prank, so I laughed a little bit, even though I was terrified, and yelled out, "Who's there?" The voice didn't answer right away. Then it said the exact same thing again, but the pitch was totally off. It sounded almost mechanical, like a recording being played back at the wrong speed. "Jake, come inside. It's getting cold." But right at the end of the sentence, the voice glitched and sounded like a deep man's voice, then went back to his mom's voice. I grabbed my flashlight. It was just a cheap one from Walmart, but I shone it toward the trees. I saw it. At first, I thought it was a really big coyote or a deer, but it was standing up on its back legs. But its legs were bent all wrong, like the joints were broken or facing the wrong way. It was hunched over. When the light hit its face, its eyes reflected the light, but they didn't look like animal eyes. They were set flat on the front of its head, like a human's. It didn't really have a snout, just a weird, stretched out mouth. It didn't run when the light hit it. It just did this creepy, jerky walk sideways, back into the shadow of a pine tree. And as it moved, it made this wet, coughing giggle. It sounded like a person trying to copy a laugh, but they didn't actually know how to do it. We both absolutely lost our minds. We didn't even try to pack up the tent or the sleeping bags. We just bolted from my truck. I dropped the keys on the ground because my hands were shaking so bad, and I was crying and screaming at Jake to get in. We scrambled inside and locked the doors. I started the engine and threw the truck into reverse. When the headlights swung around and hit the dirt road ahead of us, we saw it again. It was standing right at the edge of the road, just watching us. Now that it was in the full headlights, I could see it was way too tall, like maybe 7 feet. It had patchy, dirty gray fur, but its skin underneath looked bruised and pale. It was just staring at the truck. It didn't have any expression on its face at all. I hit the gas and we tore down that dirt road. I swear, I drove like 80 miles an hour on a road that you're supposed to go 20 on. I didn't care if I popped a tire, I just wanted to get to the highway. We didn't stop driving until we reached a gas station with actual lights and people. We sat in the parking lot until the sun came up. The next day, we went back with Jake's uncle, who brought his rifle to get our tent and gear. Around our campsite, in the dirt, there were these tracks. They didn't look like paws. They looked like human handprints, but the fingers were way too long, and they were dug really deep into the dirt, like whatever it was putting all its weight on them while crawling. Story 4. To give some background on the story and its setting, I grew up in the Huron area of Ontario. For those unfamiliar, it is about a 3-hour drive west of Toronto, where I currently live. I now live on the shores of Lake Huron, not far from where stories about the Dark Donnelly clan originated. For those who enjoy dark history in high school history class, a teacher once told us about his experiences in a small forest called Lobb's Bush. Although I didn't know much about it at the time, quite a few locals knew it as a haunted place, or somewhere people had unexplained but eerily similar encounters. This teacher was very candid about his experiences there, not only his rugged appearance, but his firm skepticism of anything mystical or supernatural, which made him the most compelling person to listen to. He always ended his stories or answered questions with, "I don't believe it, I can't explain it. I'm just telling you what happened." A few years later, in the winter of 2017, after having been his student in high school and having left for my first year of university, I returned home for the winter break to spend time with family and catch up with friends. For my friend group, for anyone familiar with small-town life, our favorite pastime was the classic buy a pile of cheap reserve cigarettes pile into one of your friend's beat-up cars and smoke talk, and play the worst music imaginable until either the cigarettes or the gas runs out. We were all around 16 to 18 years old, so this was the most fun way to find something to do. Plus, it was a welcome break from the intensity of university. This was the first time I had seen these friends in several months, so we were all excited to reconnect. I won't recount our early evening antics to avoid boring you, but the story begins when, after hours of driving around, talking, we stopped at a forest trail so some people could smoke cannabis. As we began walking down one of the trails, I remember feeling a very distinct change in the atmosphere around me. I didn't really want to voice my feelings to avoid killing the mood, but I definitely felt I needed to stay on high alert. I have never really found a way to describe the physical sensation other than a heaviness in my chest, but somehow I felt very clearly that something was watching us and did not want us there. Every few steps, I had to look back to make sure nothing was stalking us. All we had were phone flashlights, which had a very short range. The trail ran deep through dense brush, mostly young trees that bent down over the path, almost forming a tunnel. It looked as though we were walking into the lair of some enormous creature slowly advancing toward us. After only a few hundred meters, we realized the quiet night was turning into a snowstorm. We all agreed to head back to the car and start driving home before things got worse. By the time we returned to the car, the trees were swaying violently in the wind, and the snow made it difficult to see more than a few meters ahead. We drove toward the nearest town to stay at a friend's house and wait out the storm. As we drove, we monitored the weather. Conditions kept worsening until the snow nearly blinded us. Going around a deep curve, we misjudged the space needed to turn and felt the car lose traction and slide sideways into a ditch. After arguing and venting frustration, we were stuck in the ditch for about 5 hours before local police rescued us and brought us to town. While stuck in the ditch, I mentioned the feeling I had when walking into that forest, and we all agreed we had felt we didn't belong there. No one had spoken up until that moment. Only then did the friend who had been driving, the only one familiar with those back roads, tell us that we had actually been walking through Lob's Bush. Fast forward to what I believe was the second semester reading week. I returned home with friends and resumed our old routines. After a really enjoyable night of conversation, we decided to go back to Lob's Bush, since none of us had been there since getting stuck in the ditch. This month was noticeably warmer, with far less snow. I remember feeling almost eager to return, instead of facing the black storm clouds and whiteout conditions from before. Tonight, the moon was out. You could almost see without a flashlight. We parked in the same spot, grabbed all necessary smoking supplies, a pack of cigarettes for the designated driver, and some snacks to share. Because, of course, neither time did we let our designated driver get high. As we started walking the trail, I began recognizing landmarks I had missed before. During my first visit, under the moonlight illuminating everything more clearly, I crossed the familiar threshold and was genuinely surprised to feel no sense of being watched or unwelcome. After a while, I almost forgot I was in that notorious forest and simply enjoyed a late-night walk through the woods, laughing with friends. Further down the trail, we came to a clearing on the right side of the path. The trees parted to reveal the edge of a field. Lit by the moon on the left, the thinning brush opened onto a grassy, lush patch with a small stream running through it. The scene looked like a natural amphitheater, the stream running through it like a main aisle, the sparse trees offering plenty of seating for an audience, and the opening leading down to a farmer's field serving as a stage. Honestly, I completely forgot why we had come and was simply taken by the beauty of the place as we found somewhere to stop and get ready. Just as someone was lighting up, a friend had the brilliant idea of shouting, "Oh hey, I forgot I have Roman candles." As we all turned to look, she had already brought out her lighter and was igniting the candle. We were teenagers. We were idiots. She began pointing it toward the large open area, occasionally moving it around so the fire didn't hit the same spot, the shots flying higher and higher. Eventually, she aimed it in the opposite direction, toward the forest, with surprising precision. Not a single shot hit anything, actually. None of the firework blasts struck anything before flying out of sight, until finally one hit a tree near the stream and spiraled into the forest where we could no longer see it. Within less than a second, a terrifying scream erupted from exactly where the Roman candle had disappeared into the trees. All of us went completely silent, unsure what to do, as the screaming continued for an alarming amount of time. The only way I can describe it is as a combination of a deeper howler monkey's growl and the shrill bugling cry of a moose rising higher and higher in pitch. The piercing scream kept going. I remember my ears ringing from the sheer volume. I wanted to cover them, but all of us were frozen. Finally, one person snapped out of it and yelled, "Run!" and bolted toward the farmer's field. One by one, we all began fleeing from the relentless screaming. From within the forest, as we ran, the scream finally stopped after about 10 seconds of continuous noise. There was no breath, no change in the cry, no variation in pitch. Whatever it was could scream at that volume longer than any animal I had ever heard. Before we could even process that, we heard a massive rustling in the forest, and then something drew in a huge breath, preparing to scream again. The inhalation itself was just as terrifying, like the rumble of a crocodile blended with the laugh of a hyena. I know both sounds I am describing are exhaled sounds, but you could tell this was a powerful intake of breath, a preparation before screaming again, unlike the first scream, which seemed almost like a reaction to nearly being hit by the firework. This was clearly a roar of rage. Whatever it was, the sheer size of the sound proved that, and now it was moving toward us, growing even louder. I can only assume it was aimed directly at us, though by that point, all of us were heavy smokers. We ran as fast as we could without daring to look back, completely terrified by the second continuous roar closing in. After about 15 seconds, the screaming abruptly stopped. It took us a moment to register the silence. We turned around and found that we had cleared the forest and reached the field. We glanced back just long enough to see that the distance between us and the edge of the brush was only about 50 to 100 meters. Even before fully thinking it through, we were shakily agreeing to walk to the nearest road and circle back around the brush to find our parking spot. Only when we reached the road and caught our breath from the smoke did someone ask whether everyone else had heard and felt the same thing. We talked briefly, but were too shaken for much conversation. About 20 minutes later, we finally made it back to the road and spotted the car. People were starting to calm down a little, the adrenaline slowly fading. We unlocked the car, and everyone got into their seats with bags still on their shoulders. None of us had even taken our bags off before the first scream rang out again. When the driver finally started the car and the headlights lit up the forest ahead, the front passenger screamed, "Drive, drive, drive." The driver didn't look. He threw it in reverse and swung the car back to speed away down the trail behind them, racing along the edge of the bush. The friend who had just screamed started panicking again. I was sitting right behind him, hand on his shoulder from the back seat, while we tried to ask what was happening, and I turned my head to look into the forest. I genuinely felt as though time slowed down as I looked over, with that same feeling of being watched that I'd had on my very first walk into those woods. As the rows of trees swept past, I could clearly see two wide eyes reflecting back at me. I could clearly see two complete reflective circles. I was completely frozen and could not look away. I couldn't tell whether those eyes were staring at me, at the whole car, or even at the light they were reflecting as we drove alongside the forest. They were clearly several meters deeper into the trees, so I couldn't make out their height, but I could easily see that those eyes belonged to a head much larger and much taller than a human's. I completely forgot about reassuring the person in front of me, and instead tried to keep looking back at it through the rear window as we kept driving, but I lost sight of it entirely. I couldn't even make a sound, but my mind was spinning. The longer I sat with it, the more I wondered how it had appeared where I could see it after we had already driven away from the parking spot. I don't know how much it saw from inside the car, but I know it had seen me. It had seen all of us in that forest. I don't know how else to describe it except that I felt completely like prey, and whatever it was a predator that knew me well. After driving a while on the way back to a friend's farm, we could finally all talk about what had happened. We had all heard the same sounds, the rustling, the long drawn-out screams, and finally, the other passenger and I both confirmed we had seen the wide, staring eyes. None of us could make out what it was, but we both agreed it had been staring at us and was far too large to identify. That passenger also remarked that although it had been several meters deep in the trees when he saw it, it was absolutely much larger than a human. After a few more hours of talking it through, we all finally felt comfortable enough to drive home. For months afterward, every time we saw each other, we made sure we all remembered the same thing, just to confirm none of us had actually lost our minds. I kept the story to myself for about a year, unsure who to tell or who would believe us. Eventually, as I felt more comfortable talking about it and researching similar experiences, I came to the personal conclusion that it may have been something like a skinwalker, and began digging deeper into related accounts. There was quite a lot of discussion about people having similar experiences or strange encounters at Lob's Bush, and I genuinely wanted to explore every possible explanation. Additionally, although I was somewhat raised around Christianity through school, that had never been a doctrine I truly followed or placed much faith in regarding supernatural forces until this happened to me. If this was real and it happened to me, I could no longer dismiss anything, and it fundamentally changed how I view any form of religion or spiritual belief. Through friends and a few events, I became acquainted with several indigenous community members and elders I trusted enough to share traditional knowledge with. I told the story to 3 elders, and all 3 essentially said the same thing, quite matter-of-factly. Yeah, that sounds like a shapeshifter. A few others shared similar experiences that their own friends and family members had had over the past 2 years. I spoke with several more people about it, And eventually, a friend suggested I search online for what a skinwalker sounds like. I searched and found several sounds that were very similar, giving me that "it's watching you" feeling. I shuddered and felt that, above all else, it was enough confirmation for me. To this day, I have begun my own spiritual path with a deep respect for this land, and essentially now, when I'm out walking on Turtle Island, beyond the classic warnings to never whistle or call out names at night, I have made it very clear to my friends, all of whom have heard the story and know me as a respectful outdoor-loving companion, that if I ever feel anything similar to being watched, or sense that we should not be in a particular forest, they should get the hell out of there with me, every single one of them. Story 5. This happened about 3 years ago, and honestly, I still don't like talking about it too much because my kids still bring it up sometimes and it upsets them. We had a golden retriever named Biscuit. He'd been with us for 6 years at that point. Practically grew up with my kids. Total sweetheart of a dog. Never ran off, always stayed close to the yard. So when he went missing one afternoon, we were all pretty shaken up. We searched the neighborhood, put up flyers, posted in every local Facebook group we could find. Nothing. 2 days went by, and I was already dreading having to explain to my kids that Biscuit probably wasn't coming home. Then, on the third morning, my daughter comes running inside screaming that Biscuit was back. And sure enough, there he was, sitting at the edge of our backyard near the fence line, just waiting. My kids absolutely lost their minds with joy and ran straight for him. I followed behind, relieved but also confused, because we never figured out how he got out in the first place. At first glance, everything seemed fine. Same coat, same size, same white patch on his left ear he'd had since he was a puppy. But something made me slow down before I reached him. When my daughter dropped to her knees and called his name, Biscuit just stared at her. No tail wagging, no excited scrambling, no licking, just staring. Now, I know some people will say dogs can act weird when they've been lost and scared for a few days. I thought the same thing at first. I told myself he was probably just shaken up, maybe hadn't eaten, maybe got spooked by something out there. But then my son grabbed his old tennis ball, the one Biscuit would absolutely go insane for, and rolled it across the grass. The dog watched it roll, didn't move an inch. I crouched down and held out my hand for him to sniff, the way you're supposed to reapproach a scared dog. He looked at my hand, then looked up at my face, and I got this horrible feeling in my gut. His eyes were wrong. I can't fully explain it. Biscuit had these warm, dopey brown eyes that always looked like he was about 3 seconds from falling asleep. These eyes were too sharp, too focused, like something behind them was actually studying me back. I told the kids to go inside and get some water and food for him, just to get them away from the dog for a minute. Once they were gone, I stayed crouched there, looking at him. I clicked my tongue the way I always did when I wanted him to come to me. That click was basically magic with Biscuit. He'd come bounding over from anywhere in the house the second he heard it. This dog just tilted his head at me like he'd never heard the sound before in his life. I reached out slowly and scratched behind his ear. He let me, but he didn't lean into it. He just sat there tolerating it with that same locked-on stare. That night, I told my wife something was wrong. She thought I was being paranoid, but then she noticed it too. When she was cooking dinner, she dropped a piece of chicken on the floor. Biscuit was always underfoot in the kitchen, always hovering right at her ankles, waiting for exactly that to happen. He wasn't even in the room. She found him sitting at the back door, staring out into the yard in the direction of the fence where he'd appeared that morning. He didn't eat the food we put out. He didn't drink any water. He didn't sleep on his bed. Every time I got up in the night to check, he was just sitting at that back door, completely still, looking outside. By the second day, my wife was on board that something was seriously off. We called the vet, who suggested he might have a neurological issue, head trauma from an accident, something like that. We made an appointment for the following morning. That night, around 2 a.m., our smoke detector let out a single random beep, the low battery warning kind. Nothing crazy, but Biscuit, or whatever was in our house wearing Biscuit, completely lost it. It made a sound I have never in my life heard come out of a dog. It wasn't barking, it was more like a shriek, a horrible strangled noise that didn't sound anything like a dog should sound. My kids both woke up crying. My wife grabbed them, and I went downstairs. The thing was standing in the middle of the kitchen, and it was looking at me, but its head was tilted at an angle that was just a little too far, like it had gone about 10 degrees past where a dog's neck is supposed to go. I opened the back door without even thinking about it. Just pure instinct. Get it out of my house. It walked out, crossed the yard, and slipped through that same gap in the fence, and it was gone. We never saw it again. The real Biscuit turned up 4 days later. Found by a family about 2 miles away. He'd gotten his collar snagged on a wire fence and couldn't get free. He was dehydrated and skinny, but perfectly fine, happy, dopey, and absolutely lost his mind when he saw us. Back to his old self immediately. I've never told my kids about what was in the house those 2 days. As far as they're concerned, Biscuit got lost and then came home. I'd like to keep it that way. But I know what I saw, and I know that whatever came back to our yard that first morning was not our dog. Story 6. I worked overnight security at a packaging facility out in the middle of nowhere for about 8 months. The kind of place surrounded by flat, empty land on all sides, one road in and one road out, and the nearest gas station a 20-minute drive away. Not exactly a glamorous job, but it paid okay, and the nights were usually dead quiet. Just me and a rotating cast of 1 or 2 other guards depending on the shift. The night this happened, my coworker Dave had called in sick. I got the message before I left the house, so I knew going in that I was flying solo. That was fine. It happened occasionally. The job was mostly just walking the perimeter every hour, watching the monitor bank, and trying not to fall asleep. I'd been there a couple of hours, maybe around midnight, when I noticed something on the monitors. We had 8 cameras total. 4 inside covering the main floor, loading dock, break room, and corridor. 4 outside covering the parking lot, both side entrances and the rear of the building. I was sitting there half watching them when I caught movement on the corridor camera. Interior, camera 3. It was Dave. I recognized him immediately. Same build, same jacket he always wore, this distinctive red and black flannel that I'd seen him in at least a dozen times. He was walking down the corridor, heading toward the loading dock. Slow, normal pace. I actually laughed a little at first. I figured he'd started feeling better and decided to come in anyway without bothering to call. Typical Dave. I radioed him. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. I watched him on the monitor reach the loading dock and then move off camera. I switched to the loading dock feed. Empty. I flipped through all the other interior cameras. Nobody. I figured there must be a lag in the feed or something. Some technical glitch, even though I'd never seen that happen before. I wrote it off, made a note in the log, and went back to my rounds. About 40 minutes later, I was at the monitor bank again when I saw him a second time. Camera 3 again. Same corridor, same jacket, same slow walk. I immediately radioed and got nothing. I called his cell phone directly this time. It rang out and went to voicemail. I sat there for a second, trying to think through it logically. The building was locked. I had the only key on my belt. There was no way someone was inside. I pulled up the camera playback from earlier and watched the first appearance again. I watched the figure walk the full length of the corridor, clear as day. Then it did something that made my stomach drop. Just before reaching the end of the corridor, where it would have turned toward the loading dock, it stopped, and it turned its head toward the camera. It just stood there for a moment, looking directly into the lens. Then it kept walking and went off screen. I sat there for probably 5 minutes, just staring at the monitor, not moving. I am a pretty pragmatic person. I don't spook easily, but something about being watched through a camera by something that shouldn't be in the building at all, in the dark, alone, hit different. I decided I wasn't going to go check the corridor. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I'm not a horror movie character, and I had no interest in going to investigate. My job was to monitor and report, not to confront whatever that was. So I sat tight, kept all the interior lights on, and watched the monitors. Another hour passed and nothing happened. I'd almost talked myself back into a rational explanation when I glanced up at the exterior cameras, the one covering the rear of the building. Dave was standing outside, same jacket, standing in the dirt lot behind the building, completely still, facing the building. The camera angle was wide enough that I could see he was just standing there with his arms at his sides, staring up at the rear wall. I called his cell again. I watched the figure on the monitor. It didn't move. No phone to the ear, no flinching. The call went to voicemail again. Then it looked up, not at the building, at the camera, at me. I don't know how long I sat there staring back at it. It felt like a long time. It didn't move, it didn't do anything, it just looked. I turned the exterior floodlights on remotely from the panel, and in the full light, I could see it clearly. Something was wrong with the proportions. The arms were slightly too long. The way it was standing was just a degree or two off from how a person naturally stands. And the face, even on a grainy nighttime camera, the face was wrong. I couldn't tell you exactly how. Just wrong in a way that made every instinct I had scream at me. I turned on every light in the building, every single one. And I didn't move from that chair until the sun came up and the morning crew arrived. I quit 2 weeks later, told them it was for personal reasons. The real reason was that when I came in for my next shift, I checked the camera logs from that night, the timestamps, hoping to pull the footage and figure out what I'd actually seen. The corridor camera had no footage from that entire night, not corrupted, not deleted, just blank, as if the camera had never recorded anything. Every other camera was fine. I called Dave the next day and asked him, as casually as I could manage, if he'd stopped by the facility at all that night after calling in sick. He said no, he'd been in bed all evening. He sounded genuinely confused that I was asking. I've never gone back to that area. I don't really have a rational explanation, and at this point I've stopped trying to come up with one. Story 7. This was the summer I was 16. My parents sent me to stay with my Uncle Ray for 2 months on his ranch in rural New Mexico. It wasn't exactly a punishment, more like a character-building exercise. Their words. Uncle Ray ran a small operation, a few dozen cattle, some chickens, 2 horses, hard work, early mornings, the whole deal. I actually didn't mind it. Ray was a good guy, funny, no nonsense, and he treated me like an adult. The first few weeks were completely normal. I fell into a routine. Up at 5, feed the animals, check the fence lines, help Ray with whatever needed doing, crash hard by 9 p.m. Good, honest tiredness. I slept like a rock every night. Then the cattle started dying. First one was written off as illness. Second one, Ray figured maybe a predator, coyote or something, even though the carcass didn't look right to him. By the third one, he was genuinely puzzled and frustrated. He called the vet out, who couldn't give a clear answer either. The bodies weren't mauled the way a predator normally does it. They were just drained. That was the word the vet used. Like something had taken what it wanted and left the rest untouched. Ray started going out at night to check the herd. He'd take his rifle and his dog, a big old cattle dog named Peso, and do a loop around the pasture before bed. He asked if I wanted to come. I said yes the first couple of times. Nothing happened on those walks, and eventually I stopped joining him, figuring it was a waste of sleep. About a week after the third animal died, I was in the barn around dusk, finishing up with the horses when I heard something moving in the far corner, behind the hay bales stacked along the back wall. Heavy movement, slow and deliberate. I figured it was a stray cat or maybe a raccoon that had gotten in. I grabbed a flashlight off the workbench and went to look. I got around to the backside of the hay bales and swept the light across the corner. Uncle Ray was crouched there against the wall. My first reaction was just pure confusion. He was facing away from me, hunched over something on the ground. I couldn't see what. I almost called out to him. I had his name right on the tip of my tongue when something stopped me cold. The sound, whatever he was doing, there was this wet noise coming from the corner. Quiet, rhythmic, horrible. The kind of sound you don't want to be hearing in a dark barn. And Peso wasn't with him. Ray never went anywhere on the property after dark without that dog. I stood completely still with the flashlight on him. He hadn't reacted to the light at all. A person would have turned around or at least flinched. He just stayed crouched there, facing the wall, making that sound. I took one step back. The floorboard creaked under my boot. It stopped. The thing in the corner went completely still. And then, slowly, it started to turn its head. Not its body. Just its head, rotating backward toward me, and it went too far. Way too far, like an owl. But wrong, like the neck had too many joints in it. I did not wait to see the face. I turned and walked very fast out of the barn, because my legs didn't seem to want to run. I crossed the yard and pushed open the back door of the ranch house and nearly walked directly into Uncle Ray. He was standing in the kitchen in his socks, holding a cup of coffee. He'd clearly been inside for a while. I just stared at him. He looked at me and immediately knew something was wrong. He set the coffee down and asked me what happened. Peso was lying on the floor next to the kitchen table, completely relaxed. I told him what I saw. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell me I was overtired or imagining things. He listened to the whole thing. Then he set his jaw and picked up his rifle from beside the back door and said, "Stay inside." He and Peso went out to the barn. I watched from the kitchen window. They were out there for maybe 10 minutes. When Ray came back in, he said the barn was empty. Nothing in the corner, nothing on the floor, no sign of anything. But he was quiet for the rest of the night. Quieter than I'd ever seen him. The next day, he drove into town and came back with a man I didn't know. Older guy, native, didn't speak much. He walked the whole property slowly, and at certain spots, he'd stop and do something, tie something to a fence post, scatter something on the ground. I don't know exactly what he was doing, and I knew better than to ask too many questions. After the man left, Ray sat me down and told me flat out that there were things in this part of the country that had been here a lot longer than any of us, and that some of them could look like whatever they wanted to look like. He said the most important thing, and he said it very clearly, was that if I ever saw something that looked like him and felt wrong, I should not speak to it. Don't say its name. Don't answer it. Just get back to the house. No more cattle died after that. Story 8. This happened about 5 years ago during the late November deer season in northern Wisconsin. I've been hunting my entire life, and I'm used to the woods at night, but what happened that afternoon completely changed how I feel about being out there alone. I was sitting in my favorite tree stand, which is basically a small wooden platform bolted to a massive oak tree about 15 feet off the ground. It was late afternoon, around 4:30 p.m. The sun was just starting to dip below the tree line, casting long gray shadows across the clearing in front of me. It was incredibly quiet, the kind of winter silence where you can hear a single leaf hit the frozen ground. I was scanning the brush when a doe stepped out into the clearing. Right away, something felt off. Deer are usually incredibly graceful and silent, but this one was walking heavily, almost dragging its back legs. I raised my rifle and looked through the scope to get a better look. Through the lens, I realized its face looked weirdly flat, and its eyes weren't reflecting the dim light the way they normally should. Suddenly, the doe stopped right in the middle of the clearing. It didn't sniff the air or look around for food. It just stood there completely rigid. Then it slowly began to shift its weight. It raised its front legs off the ground and stood straight up on its hind legs. It looked incredibly awkward, like a human trying to balance in a heavy, stiff costume. Its neck twisted slowly, and it looked directly up at my tree stand. My heart started hammering in my chest. I kept my rifle pointed at it, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't aim. Then, the silence was broken. A sound started coming from the clearing. It was the standard default iPhone marimba ringtone. I instantly reached for my pocket, thinking my phone was ringing and that I had forgotten to put it on silent. But my pocket was empty. I realized my phone was actually sitting on the wooden ledge right next to me, and the screen was completely dark. The ringtone was coming from the deer. It was standing there on two legs, staring directly into my eyes, emitting my exact phone ringtone from its open throat. The sound was incredibly clear, but it had a flat, hollow quality to it, like a cheap speaker. I was frozen. I couldn't even breathe. I think it wanted me to reach out, move, or make a noise so it could confirm exactly where I was sitting. After what felt like hours, the ringing sound abruptly stopped. The creature let out a strange, clicking noise from its throat, dropped back down onto all fours, and scrambled back into the thick brush. But it didn't run like a normal deer. It ran with a bizarre loping gait, its limbs flailing unnaturally. I stayed up in that tree stand until my buddies came looking for me with flashlights. I never went back to that spot, and I sold my gear the very next week. Story 9. I've been driving semi-trucks for over 15 years, mostly doing long-haul routes through the Southwest. You see a lot of weird things on the road at night, but nothing ever made me want to quit my job until a rainy night on Highway 50 in Nevada, often called the loneliest road in America. It was around 1:30 a.m., and a heavy, cold rain was coming down. There hadn't been another car on the road for at least 40 miles. As my headlights cut through the darkness, I spotted a figure standing on the shoulder next to a beat-up sedan with its hazard lights blinking weakly. Normally, I don't pick up hitchhikers. It's against company policy and just generally unsafe, but it was freezing, raining, and there was absolutely no cell service out there. I felt a pang of pity, so I slowed the big rig down and pulled over. The door opened, and a man climbed up into the passenger seat. He was wearing a heavy, dark rain jacket with the hood pulled down low over his face. "Thanks for stopping," he said. His voice was incredibly raspy, like he hadn't used it in years. "No problem," I replied, shifting the truck back into gear. "Where are you headed?" He didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead through the windshield. I figured he was just tired or shaken up from his car breaking down, so I let it go and focused on the road. About 10 minutes went by in silence. That's when the first weird thing happened. The passenger reached for his seatbelt. Instead of clicking it into the buckle, he just pulled the strap all the way out and held the metal tongue against his chest, staring at it blankly. He stayed like that for minutes. To break the tension, I reached over and turned on my CB radio. A couple of other truckers were talking about a road closure about 60 miles ahead. Suddenly, my passenger spoke up. "Watch out for that black ice near mile marker 12, he said. I froze. His voice was completely different now. It sounded exactly like the static-filled, gravelly voice of the trucker who had just spoken on the radio a few seconds ago. It wasn't just the words. He had copied the exact accent, the static hiss, and even the breathy pause at the end of the sentence. My stomach dropped. I slowly glanced over at him. The hood of his jacket had slipped back a little bit. In the dim glow of my dashboard lights, I could see his face. His skin looked leathery and tight, but the worst part was his legs. He had his knees pressed right up against the dashboard, but they were bent entirely backward, like the hind legs of a dog. He didn't seem to be in any pain at all. I felt a wave of absolute terror. I was trapped in a tiny metal cab with something that was definitely not human. I tried to keep my voice as steady as possible. "Hey man," I said, "I think my front tire is pulling to the right. I'm going to pull over at this next rest stop to check the lug nuts." I didn't wait for a reply. I slammed on the brakes and pulled the truck into a gravel turnout on the side of the highway. As soon as the truck came to a stop, I unlocked the passenger door. "We're here," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the road ahead, too afraid to look at him. The passenger didn't say a word. He let go of the seatbelt, opened the door, and slipped out into the rain. I finally risked a glance at the side mirror. In the red glow of my taillights, I watched the figure drop down onto all fours. It sprinted away into the sagebrush desert, moving at a speed that no human could ever match. I floored the gas pedal and didn't stop driving until I hit a well-lit truck stop 2 hours later.